So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to crunch 1400 years of Islamic history in 5 minutes and make it as exciting as I can possibly make it. Because I hated history when I was a little girl. At this age, I appreciate history. And now I understand why they say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In order for you to understand why Western civilization is very different than the Islamic world, you need to understand the history of Islam. When Prophet Muhammad supposedly revealed his revelation from the angel Gabriel that he is supposed to be the last of the prophets in the early 600s, he started preaching in his own city, Mecca. He tried to recruit friends and followers to be able to spread his religion. And he tried for 12 years and failed. And after 12 years, he was only able to recruit his immediate family and friends. So he decided, if I go to Medina, which was the Jewish hub of Arabia, the business hub where the Jews lived, if I go there and preach my religion to them, if they accept me, that will buy me respect and stature between my own people, and they will accept me. So Prophet Muhammad started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament to make his religion more palpable to the Jews, to make it a lot similar. This is why you see a lot of similarities between Judaism and Islam. For example, Jews don't eat pigs, Muslims don't eat pigs. Jews pray a few times a day, Muslims pray a few times a day. Jews fast on Yom Kippur, Muslims fast on Ramadan. And this is why you started seeing a lot of good writing in the beginning of the Quran when Prophet Muhammad was saying all the good things about the people of the book. He took his message and went to Medina trying to recruit the Jews, talking about the people of the book, talking about how similar the two religions are. When they refused to accept him and follow him as the last of the prophet, that's when he turned against them and started killing them and started expelling them. That's when Islam went from a spiritual movement for the first 12 years of Islam into a political movement cloaked in religion after the year of the Hijrah, after Muhammad went to Medina and the Jews did not accept him. He became a military warrior and declared war on them and started expelling them. Jews and Christians became dhimmi, or second-class citizens. They were only allowed to stay alive and not be killed only by paying the jizya or the protection tax. So they had a choice: convert to Islam, or if you want to stay alive, you have to pay the jizya or protection tax, living as dhimmi in the Islamic nation. Christians and Jews could not ring church bells. Jews could not blow the shofar. Christians could not ring church bells. They could not pray publicly. Christians and Jews could not gather together and build new churches or new temples. And the way they paid the jizya or the protection tax was in a monthly ceremony where they would get together downtown and the Jew would kneel on his knee and hand his goods to the mullah, who would take the goods as the price for buying the protection. And in many areas, Jews and Christians were given necklaces to wear as a receipt that they paid their jizya or their protection tax. Jews considered najis under Islam. Najis is bodily fluid. Najis is garbage. Najis is dogs. Najis is dirty. So Christians and Jews were treated as second-class citizens. Islam continued to grow. As Islam grew, more people became dhimmi or second-class citizens. Jews and Christians were given identifiable clothing. The yellow star, which was given to the Jews that most people think is a German invention. It was actually an Islamic invention in the 9th century in Iraq by the second Khalif Al-Mutawakkil of Iraq, who invented the yellow star for the Jews to be identified as they walked down the street. Because Jews were considered najis, if a Muslim man or a Jew walked on the same side of the street, the Jew had to cross the other side so the Muslim man can walk, so he's not dirtied by the filth of the Jew. Christians were given the zunnar, the belt, which most of you men are wearing right now. That was an Islamic invention for the Christians. Islam continued to grow. They went all the way to Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem. Christians couldn't ring their church bells in Jerusalem. The Pope in Rome in 1090 told the Christians, how could you sit idly by and allow your brethren to suffer like this in the Holy Land? You need to go liberate the Christians. You need to go help the Christians. That's why the Crusaders were launched. The Crusaders were not launched because they just felt like waking up in the morning and going and converting a bunch of Muslims or beheading them. The Crusaders were launched to liberate Jerusalem. And they were able to liberate Jerusalem for less than 100 years before Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin, took it back, and Jerusalem remained under Islamic control until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky. The Crusaders continued fighting Islam, and for 300 years they tried and failed. And by the 1300s, the Crusaders disappeared because they could not win against Islam. Islam continued to expand. They went all the way to Central Europe. They went all the way to China. They went to India. They conquered Spain. They changed the name of Spain from Spain to Andalusia. And they started, as they advanced, as they conquered more nations, more people paid the jizya, or the protection tax. And this is how the Islamic Empire grew. It went all the way until they was stopped at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. 9/11 is not a date that Osama bin Laden just picked out of a hat. 9/11 is a symbolic date in the Islamic calendar. By the 1600s, Islam had covered more of the earth's surface than the Roman Empire did at its peak. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, the Europeans were experiencing the European Industrial Revolution, where the Europeans were able to invent products on factory lines, where they are able to make money and sell products, which gave them the money to build a strong army in order to fight the Muslims. And that's how they were able to stop them at the gates of Vienna on 9/11. The Europeans started the pushback against Islam. They pushed them out of Europe. They pushed them out of all the way to the Middle East and North Africa. By 1924, the Islamic Empire ended. In 1924, the Islamic Caliphate ended in Turkey by President Ataturk, who was a secularist. He ended the Islamic Empire, and he gave women rights to vote. He gave women a right to an education, a right to work, a right to choose a husband. He forbid women from wearing the hijab. He forbid men from wearing the beard. The Muslims hate him so much that they consider him a Jewish agent, because they believe that his mother in her bloodline was Jewish, and that was the influence on Ataturk. By the time the Islamic Empire, or the Islamic Caliphate, or the Islamic State ended in 1924, the Islamic Caliphate had existed for 1400 years, and it ended less than 100 years ago. By the time the Islamic Caliphate ended in 1924, 270 million people around the world were killed by Islam. 270 million. And we didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and there was nuclear weapons. All of these people were killed, butchered by the sword. The people in the world, less than 100 years ago, how many people knew this history? Please raise your hand. We in America have failed to educate our children about history. We in America failed to educate our population about history. Our children in high school, you take any 17, 16-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, and ask them about World War II. They can't even tell you what happened in World War II. For them, it's ancient history, and we still have our World War II veteran walking among us. That's how little we know of history. Islam ended in 1924, the Caliphate. People thought the Caliphate will never be resurrected. The Caliphate will never come back. But two things happened in the Middle East in the last century that made the Islamists be able to resurrect the Caliphate. Number one is the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia, which we were able to discover and were stupid enough to allow them to nationalize it. And the number two that happened was Ayatollah Khomeini coming to power in 1979. That gave the Islamists the money and also the spiritual covering in order to explode on the world stage. And people say, oh, well, the Wahhabis exported their Wahhabi radical religion. The Wahhabis are the name of Wahhab. They're not a different sect of Islam. They follow the authentic preaching of Prophet Muhammad, the way Prophet Muhammad lived and practiced his religion. This is why neither you or me or any infidel can step a foot in Mecca, because as far as they're concerned, we are filth. And as infidels, we're not allowed to step a foot, not President Obama and not anybody else. As a matter of fact, Al-Qaeda used to use Saudi Arabia and its success as an excuse to recruit members, as the example to show them how Allah has blessed Saudi Arabia because of the way they adhere to the tenets of Islam. And today we talk about ISIS. ISIS is not a new invention. ISIS resurrected the caliphate that ended less than 100 years ago. Except we are too ignorant and too uninformed to understand what ISIS is doing and why ISIS is succeeding. Two things you need to understand about Islam and the principles of war in Islam. One is the law of taqiyya, which means lying and deception. It means that a Muslim man can lay his hand on the Quran and swear that he is telling the truth, knowing that he is lying, but also knowing that the Quran will forgive him because he is advancing the cause of Islam. The second thing you need to know about is that the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which is an Islamic principle of war and a model on how to deceive your enemy when you have to sign peace treaties with your enemy. And it is based on an example by Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad was attacking the Meccans and their caravans when he was living in Medina. One day he attacked them because this is how he got the goodies. He would attack them, rob them, and spread the goodies among his men. And this is how he was able to recruit, because this is how people made money without working. And so he attacked the Meccan caravans. When he realized he's not able to defeat the Meccans in that city of Al-Hudaybiyah, in that place, he signed a 10-year treaty with them. Does that sound familiar? A 10-year treaty with them that says he will not attack them, he will have peace with them, he will not declare war on them. Muhammad used the treaty for 2 years to build his military, strengthen his army, and when he realized he was strong enough to attack his enemies when they least expected it, because they thought they had a peace treaty with Muhammad, he broke the treaty, attacked them 2 years later, and Mecca fell within 24 hours because they were not expecting the attack. And that became a principle of war in Islam. And to give you an example of how that is practiced, this is why anything signed with Iran means nothing to them. And to give you an example of how this law has been put to use in recent history, Yasser Arafat, who's not an Islamist, but he is a Muslim, met with the Israelis and signed the Oslo Accord in 1993. Remember all the handshaking at the lawn of the White House? The Oslo Accord, Yasser Arafat used the peace treaty, the Oslo Accord with Israel, to get Israel to bring him back and give him his territory, finance his military, train his police, and give his police the weapons. Yasser Arafat broke the Oslo Accord 8 years later, didn't even wait 10 years, and declared the second intifada in 2000, and all hell broke loose. He used the same treaty to win and deceive against his enemies and deceive his enemies. When Jordanian press, after Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accord with Israel, and Egyptian press would interview Yasser Arafat, and they would say, how could you sign a peace treaty with the devil? How could you sign a peace treaty with the Jews? Yasser Arafat will tell them, remember Hudaybiyah. That's all he would have to say. The whole Muslim world knew exactly what Yasser Arafat was talking about. We in the West and the Jews in Israel, it was over their heads. Nobody understood what Hudaybiyah was referring to. And this is the type of deception that we are dealing with. So when Iran signs a peace treaty with the United States for 10 years, they are using us as useful idiots, as gullible, ignorant people who are signing a peace treaty with the devil in order for Iran to continue her thing.
In this deadly game of thrones, there's no place for America or for Israel. We don't have to gamble with our future and with our children's future. Elie Wiesel. And I wish I could promise you, Elie, that the lessons of history have been learned.
That is why it is so important to be wise about who we're going to put in the White House next year. This is why it is very important that whoever we're going to elect next year to office, that the next president be well informed about the history of radical Islam, understand our enemy, understand what ISIS is all about, understand what their end goal is. And this is exactly, people are wondering how come ISIS is having such success recruiting people from all over the world. They exploded all over the world. The Pew Research did a poll, and of course the Pew Research is not Brigitte Gabriel, is not Fox News, is not Tony Perkins. The Pew Research did a poll in 2013 when they went around the world and interviewed Muslims from Islamic countries all over the world. And they asked them two questions. Would you like to have Sharia law as the law of your country? And would you like to see the Islamic Caliphate? And remember, this was in 2013, before ISIS. The 5 top countries in the world, in the Islamic world, the 5 top Islamic countries: Indonesia, 204 million Muslims; Indonesia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Egypt, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. 77% of Muslims interviewed in these Islamic countries, 77% want the establishment of Sharia law and want the establishment of an Islamic state. That means 77% of the world, quote, moderate Muslims agree with the establishment of ISIS and what ISIS is doing.
Islam as a religion is a lie wrapped with some facts and truth.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Muhammad was a true prophet, it is important to consider his character. According to Muslims in the Quran, Muhammad is a beautiful pattern of conduct and an exalted standard of character. In fact, Muslims claim Muhammad was the final prophet of God for all mankind in all time. In light of this, when we examine the early Muslim sources, we should expect to find a Muhammad who is a moral ambassador of God. However, we actually discovered countless abominable immoralities and examples of utter unnecessary ruthlessness in Muhammad's life.
Muhammad is a man who married more women than his own revelations allowed. He married the wife of his own adopted son.
After Muhammad lusted after his adopted son's wife because of seeing her scantily dressed, his adopted son then divorced her, and Muhammad shortly thereafter married her, claiming this was ordained by God. Surah 33:37 of the Quran mentions this episode, thus showing Muhammad believed his God supported this immorality, quote, "Then when Zayd had dissolved his marriage with her, with the necessary formality, we joined her in marriage to thee," unquote. What a convenient revelation to suit Muhammad's desires. This is adultery according to the Lord Jesus Christ. Matthew 5:32 says, "Everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery," unquote.
But Muhammad, if he is a man for today, let me ask you, why is it he married a girl who was only 6 and then consummated it when she was 9, and he was 53 years old. What did he do to the Jews in Medina? Look at what he did. He didn't even come from Medina. He came from Mecca. He moved to Medina in 622. By 624, he started confronting the Jews that were living there, and he threw out the Banu Qaynuqa family in the first year, 624. A year later, in 625, he threw out the Banu Nadir family. In 627, he took all 800 men of the Banu Qurayza family, gave them spades, had them dig their own trenches, and then slit their throats and let them fall into the trenches. 800 men in one afternoon. Is this a man that's a model for today? Do you really want to follow a man like that? See, I'd rather come back to Jesus Christ. You want a man who is for today. Come back to Jesus. He never let us, he didn't let anybody use, he never used violence himself, and even when violence was done against him, the one time that the disciples came to his defense, as he was being arrested there in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter comes up and cuts off the ear of the servant that's arresting him. What does Jesus do? He takes the ear, puts it back on the servant, turns toward Peter, and says, "Put away your sword. For he who lives by the sword dies by the sword." Matthew 26, verse 52. Ooh, I love my Jesus.
In the law of God, we're told that people are to love the Lord their God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, and that we're also to love our neighbor as ourselves. This, Jesus said, for example, is the first and second greatest commandment of the law. Muhammad can be seen to have fundamentally violated this in any number of ways. We even see in the Islamic literature that Muhammad is granted such an authority that he can even make the boast that he stipulated the terms or conditions of a covenant with Allah, and that Allah was not to transgress this. This is a fundamental violation of everything biblical, insofar as God is always the one who makes covenants and imposes them on people. People don't have the right to stipulate the terms of a covenant and impose them on God and say that he has to follow them or else. And yet, just to give an example of this in the Hadith literature, we're told in numerous Hadith that Muhammad would often lose his temper, and in the course of this he would end up cursing or even beating someone. In one particular case, we're told Muhammad saw a slave or an orphan girl, and he cursed her. When her caregiver found out about this, she came to Muhammad and asked him what this was all about, and Muhammad smiled at her. And then he said this. He says, "Do you not know that I made a covenant or a condition, a term with Allah, that whoever I curse, if they don't deserve it, then Allah is supposed to make it a source of blessing for that person." So you see what's going on here. It's not simply that Muhammad is saying, don't worry about it, everything's going to be okay. If this person didn't deserve it, that's all right, because Allah is going to bless that person. What actually is going on here is, in the course of covering his tracks for why he would do this sort of pernicious evil, Muhammad actually tells us that he made a covenant. He stipulated conditions or a term that Allah was not to transgress. This is the height of arrogance, and it's an arrogance not simply in vaunting oneself over and against somebody that has greater authority than you, but in this case the God of the universe, the God who made heaven and earth, Muhammad and all creatures. And yet here's one of his creatures pretending to be in a position to dictate things to God. This same story also illustrates the immorality of Muhammad on the horizontal level. The very fact that Muhammad had to bring in this explanation of Allah blessing those Muhammad wrongly curses shows that Muhammad was immoral. He was given to annoyance and fits of rage and outbursts, intemperate outbursts, even against poor orphan girls.
Muhammad claimed the angel Gabriel gave him extreme sexual power, and that people in heaven will have even more. In Ibn Sa'd's early 9th century biography of Muhammad, we read, quote, "The Apostle of Allah said, Gabriel brought a kettle from which I ate, and I was given the power of sexual intercourse equal to 40 men. Also, quote, the Apostle of Allah was given the power equal to that of 40 men, and the people of paradise will be given the power equal to 80 men, unquote. Things like this show Islam is the product of a depraved 7th century desert man, as opposed to a holy God.
He had sex with his slave girls. He supported idolatrous pagan practices like kissing the black stone and bowing down to the Kaaba. He assassinated people for criticizing his religion. He executed people for making fun of him. He told his followers that women are stupid and that their testimony is unreliable. He tortured people for money. He supported his religion by robbing people. He preached a message of violence and cruelty, and he taught his followers to believe in a God who loves only them and no one else. This is the ideal pattern of conduct, according to chapter 33, verse 21 of the Quran.
According to Quran 4:34, Muhammad allowed Muslim men to beat their wives, quote, "But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them." However, Muslim apologist Mustafa Zaid claims the original Arabic word merely means beat them lightly. This is false. The original Arabic word is wajra bahuna, and according to John Penrose, its primary meaning is simply, quote, to beat, strike, unquote. Moreover, the following scholarly Quran translations of this verse say beat, scourge, or strike, as opposed to beat lightly. Also, the following Quranic commentators translate the word as beat, as opposed to beat lightly. Quranic scholar and commentator Allama Usmani says this verse means a man can beat his wife as hard as he wants, as long as he doesn't break her bones or cause a scar. Now, in Sahih Bukhari, we read about a Muslim man beating his wife, quote, "When Allah's messenger came, Aisha said, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as the believing women. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes." According to this hadith, Muhammad did not chastise the man at all for beating his wife. Instead, he sided with the husband concerning their dispute. Also, in the following hadith, Muhammad's wife Aisha recalls an event concerning Muhammad and her, quote, "Muhammad struck me on the chest, which caused me pain," unquote. In fact, Abu Bakr seems to have learned similar behavior from Muhammad. For, in Sahih Bukhari, we read, Narrated Aisha, Abu Bakr came towards me and struck me violently with his fist and said, "You have detained the people because of your necklace." But I remained motionless as if I was dead, lest I should awake Allah's apostle, although that hit was very painful. What is more, in one hadith, Muhammad found it hilarious when his father-in-laws Abu Bakr and Umar slapped and abused various women, including his, that is Muhammad's, own wives. Quote, "He, Hadrat Umar, said, I would say something which would make the Prophet laugh, so he said, Messenger of Allah, I wish you had seen the treatment meted out to the daughter of Khadijah when she asked me some money, and I got up and slapped her on the neck. Allah's apostle laughed and said, They around me, as you see, asking for extra money. Abu Bakr then got up and went to Aisha and slapped her on the neck, and Umar stood before Hafsa and slapped her, saying, You ask Allah's messenger which he does not possess. They said, By Allah, we do not ask Allah's messenger for anything he does not possess. Muhammad also said, A man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife. This saying is also attested in the following source. Lastly, in his tafsir, the 12th century Islamic scholar Al-Zamakhshari notes Muhammad as saying, Hang the whip so your wives can see it.
There's so much about Sharia law that just is not relevant for today. And if you have any doubt, just take a look at ISIS. ISIS is probably the best example of Sharia law today, because what ISIS is doing, what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the man who is leading ISIS, the leader of ISIS, he is going right back to the Quran, right back to the traditions, applying Sharia law as the Prophet, his Prophet, did it. And it comes straight out of this book. And that's why it is so barbaric. That's why they are cutting off the heads of the prisoners. And that's right in Surah 47, Ayah 4. That's why they're crucifying. That's in Surah 4. That's why they're beating the wives. That's in Surah 4, Ayah 34. That's why they're cutting off the hands of thieves. That's in Surah 5, Ayah 38. And I could go on and on and on and on. It is barbaric. It is not relevant for today. It doesn't work. It eradicates my freedoms. That's why I don't want Sharia law today. It just doesn't make sense. Bring me back to that which Jesus gave in his example. That does make sense, and I say this all the time. Keith, I tell people, can you show me one thing that's irrelevant with Jesus Christ? And I've said that for 33 years. I've asked that question. In 33 years, I've yet to find anybody that can find anything wrong with Jesus. So if you want the best law, the best example, the best model, the best paradigm, come on back to Jesus. We've got him. Come on home.
Muhammad allowed his followers to do mutta. When Muhammad's soldiers were in battle and away from their wives and became desirous and impassioned, they sought Muhammad's advice. Muhammad's allegedly inspired solution from God was that they should engage in mutta marriage. Mutta marriage is a temporary marriage contract with a woman for the purpose of sex that would be quickly annulled after the man's sexual desires were taken care of. Bukhari reports, narrated Abdullah, "We used to participate in the holy battles led by Allah's apostle, and we had nothing, no wives with us. So we said, shall we get ourselves castrated? He forbade us that, and then allowed us to marry women with a temporary contract, and recited to us, O you who believe, make not unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful for you, but commit no transgression." Quran 587, unquote. Muhammad allowed the rape of female war captives while their husbands were alive and present. This is taught in Quran 4:24, quote, "Also prohibited are women already married, except those whom your right hands possess," unquote. The historical background about the giving of this verse is found in the following hadith. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, the Apostle of Allah sent a military expedition to Autas on the occasion of the Battle of Hunain. They met their enemy and fought with them. They defeated them and took them captives. Some of the companions of the Apostle of Allah were reluctant to have intercourse with the female captives in the presence of their husbands, who were unbelievers. So Allah the Exalted sent down the Quranic verse, "And all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess." That is to say, they are lawful for them when they complete their waiting period. This is clearly rape, since the Muslim is allowed to have sex with a captive woman while her husband is still alive and present. No sane woman would want to have sex with a warrior who just killed her tribesmen and while her husband was still present. Thus, such sex can be said to be rape. The true God hates rape and would never permit this. Deuteronomy 22:25 says, "But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die," unquote. Muhammad sucked the tongues of the sons of his companions, which is immoral and perverted. Quote, Muawiyah said, "I saw the Prophet sucking on the tongue or the lips of Al-Hasan, son of Ali. For no tongue or lips that the Prophet sucked will be tormented by hellfire." Also in a Bukhari hadith we read, "Then he, Muhammad, said, 'Where is the little one? Call the little one to me.' Hassan came running and jumped into his lap. Then he put his hand on his beard. Then the Prophet opened his mouth and put his tongue in his mouth. Then he said, 'O Allah, I love him, so love him and the one who loves him,'" unquote. Now, to save face, some Muslims read into the text the idea that this had to do with dehydration, but there is no evidence of this in the text. And if the boy was dehydrated, why was he running around excited, jumping in Muhammad's lap? Muhammad enjoyed making old women cry for fun. In Ibn Kathir's Life of the Prophet Muhammad, an old woman asked Muhammad to pray she would make it to paradise. Instead, he told her there would be no old women in paradise. She walked away crying. Later, as he laughed, he told one of his companions to go tell her. What he meant was she would not be old in paradise, but turned into a virgin. Thus, Muhammad enjoyed seeing old women cry in fear of not making it to heaven. Muhammad lured converts with promises of women with swelling breasts in heaven. Quran 78:31-33 says, "Verily for the pious is a blissful place, gardens and vineyards, and girls with swelling breasts of the same age as themselves," unquote. Rather than a description of a holy paradise with Almighty God, This sounds more like some sort of celestial brothel imagined up by a depraved 7th century desert nomad. Moreover, Muhammad invented more convenient revelations along with the one we already mentioned, involving him marrying his adopted son's wife. For example, at first Muhammad would give his wives equal attention on separate nights, but then afterwards he began to favor certain wives, and Quran 33:51 was then conveniently revealed to him, which says, "Thou mayest defer the turn of any of them that thou pleasest, and thou mayest receive any thou pleasest, and there is no blame on thee if thou invite one of those turn thou hadst set aside." Unquote. Muhammad's wife Aisha, keen on what was taking place, then said the following in response, quote, "I feel that your Lord hastens in fulfilling your wishes and desires." Unquote. Moreover, one night it was Hafsa's turn to be with Muhammad, but she had to go somewhere. Muhammad therefore decided to instead have intimate relations with one of his slave girls he was not married to in Hafsa's bed, namely Mary the Copt. Hafsa found out and she was very upset. In response, Muhammad claimed Quran 66:1 was revealed to him in order to justify his behavior. It says, quote, "O Prophet, why do you ban for yourself that which Allah has made lawful to you, seeking to please your wives?" Then Muhammad claimed Quran 66:3-5 was revealed to him, which was a stern rebuke of Aisha and Hafsa for being upset with Muhammad for his actions with Mary the Copt. These are but a few of Muhammad's